Hello, beautifuls. You are listening to Bliss and Grit. I'm Brooke Thomas, and I'll be joined soon by my very dear friend, Vanessa Scotto. On the show, we're talking about being on the embodied spiritual path and what does that actually mean? What is a real evolution of our lives? How do we ultimately embrace everything, all the beauty and crazy, the joys and the messes, the bliss and the grit that is a human life? We are just a couple of regular old humans having a conversation and sharing our personal experiences as we follow our own paths. In today's conversation, we start off talking about how the spiritual path can often be utilized like a benzo, but it is very much not a benzo. It's really a totally natural thing to want more peacefulness, but we can't tranquilize ourselves into peacefulness. When we use our paths as a kind of energetic lid on things we don't want to face, it's not just a desire for peace, it's actually a fear mechanism. We talk about how the labor of facing things that aren't in alignment for us can indeed be painful, but as with any birth, there is something else on the other side of the labor. What if we said, it's possible for all categories of your life to be in total fulfillment? Is that one of the most challenging and blasphemous things we can say? When we leave behind simplistic, and I would even say harmful, bright-siding ideas that say things like, if we just think happy thoughts, we get a happy life. What is this process that we're actually talking about? How do clarity and unconditional love for the self lead to an aligned life? What is an aligned life? If you're enjoying the show, we would be totally delighted if you left a review on iTunes or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. And if you like getting connected to new teachers and teachings, you can also head over to blissandgrit.com and subscribe to get our weekly digest of the resources that we are currently loving. If you're new here, the last note before we head into the show is that we do have potty mouths, so headphones on if you don't want other people around you to hear us cursing. Okay, here we go. Hello, beautiful.
Well, hello, my darling.
All right. So today I'm going to start with something that I tend to gripe about sometimes. But usually when I'm griping about things like apps or magazine articles. Okay. You're like, that's not what we were going to talk about. All right. So when I look at things these days in the meditation world, like meditation is it's at the beginning of having its moment, right? It's gracing the cover of Time magazine. Everyone's doing research on how good it is for you, how great. But everything points to the kinds of benefits you would want and expect, from the separate self. So what am I going to get out of it? And usually it's things like you'll be more relaxed, you'll be nicer, you'll be more productive, whatever. You and everyone listening to the show, if you've listened before, have heard me gripe about this before. But then sometimes I'll see it present in a beloved's life in a way that I see the suffering it causes. And so it makes me want to talk about it today and talk about it some more. So specifically what I'll see, and like I teach a group meditation class and I'll teach meditation workshops. And so some of those people I'll see with frequency, with regularity. And they'll say things to me, like, I'm doing the good thing. Like I'm meditating. I'm doing my practice. I'm doing it at home and I'm coming here and I'm really doing it. But I just can't relax. I don't know why. I'm still so agitated. I can't drop into the practice. And I think that this is something we have all experienced. It's very common. And, what came to me recently with one person who I was talking with about this is like, sometimes it has this quality where it's like trying to put an energetic lid on something, like saying to your being, why can't you just quiet down already? Why can't you just calm down? Be less agitated, be less up in my face. And when that's happening, and we've all been there, I think, it's usually because our being is really trying to communicate something to us or communicate several things to us. And so we are in effect saying to it, shut up and get over it. or shut up and stop it, or just chill out. Don't be this way. Don't have an issue. And it's typically around, obviously, things we don't want to or don't have the resource to face totally. Which can, of course, be a myriad of things. It can be things that are out of alignment in our lives that we're just haven't quite turned the corner on our willingness to acknowledge, but we know they're there. So jobs that don't fit, relationships that don't fit, something very painful going on, grieving somebody, or anger about some way that your boundaries got very profoundly crossed. And so it continues to be this just turning away. And then on top of the turning away from the thing that your being's trying to communicate to you, you also have this extra special cherry on top shame story that says, why can't you just relax? Why can't you just calm down? And like, this is where the story that our culture is telling right now about meditation is this awesome, like Benzo mixed with Prozac that just makes you chill and happy if you just do it. And it's like such a hurtful setup for a fail, because really what we're doing with our practices is we're trying to meet our lives, our actual lives, with clarity and with love, so that we can see the things that are not in alignment, the things that are causing us suffering, that are harmful, and we can be willing to shed, the things that or transform the things that are out of alignment and are painful. So I wanted to take a crack at that, because I think that that's going on for a lot of people. And I think that the more and more and more we hear the great news about meditation, and certainly there is great news, there's this flip side, because it's always talked about in this dualistic way. You're getting away from the bad parts of yourself and towards the good parts. You're not doing the things people don't want you to do. You are doing the things our culture gives gold stars for. It's just going to keep growing. So chew on that.
Yeah, that was a little bite size there.
Yeah, I
hope you get my sarcasm.
I do.
That was a mouthful of exploration. Okay, let me just start with where.
Can that be our new tagline? A mouthful of exploration.
I know, so gross.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to break some of my passion about this whole thing going on.
Well, no, obviously you're passionate. It's just there's many threads we can pick up on that topic. Made me think of a story I may have shared at some point. I was working with a therapist, a somatic therapist in LA. Her name is Stella Resnick. I adore her. I think she's marvelous. And in psychology, we have this term called self-soothing. And I feel like that's some of what it could be applied to some of what you're talking about. It's this way of learning how to regulate our nervous system. So we're cranked. Obviously, when we're cranked, there's that energy of overwhelm, anxiety, and fear running through our circuitry. And self-soothing is the ability to calm yourself, right? Find this regulation. The interesting thing about the ability to soothe yourself is that it's learned from your parents. So it's very much literally hooked into, if your parents were really good at regulating emotion, you learned that skill set. And if they weren't, you oftentimes are absent in the skill set of how to regulate out of a high intensity emotional state into a calmer one. So I had a mother who ran very anxious. And so, of course, when I was hurt or scared or I fell, instead of my mom becoming like, this kind of beacon of safety and sanity, she would often escalate into anxiety. So that's what my nervous system does. I get upset, I get afraid, and by nature, I make myself more upset and more afraid. At least that's how it was. So I went to this woman and I was like, I think I'm really on to it. I've figured out how to soothe myself. Like, gold star talk here, right? I'm ready for my pat on the back of what a good girl patient I am. And she was like, well, great. What is it you're doing? And I said, well, if I get really elevated or something's happening, I just say, shh, shh. And she was like, oh no.
I know. Oh, it's so hurty.
And I was like, what do you mean? I mean, that's what you do with babies, right? You make that sound like shh, 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 to a baby when they're crying. And she was like, no, you don't tell yourself to shut up. That's not the way that you regulate. She said, you just breathe. And I was like, huh, interesting. And to me, the thing about breath, and it's always been from my studies with Chinese medicine, through my current explorations, breath is aliveness, obviously. Breath frees your ability to feel emotions. So kind of the primary way that we resist experiencing life in the here and now, which includes our own emotional uprisings and energy fields, is we stop breathing, right? We shorten the breath, we restrict the breath, we contract the diaphragm. It's just one of the physiological stopgaps we have towards experiencing the here and now within our body, which is where we experience the here and now. So I get that, right? Because what she's saying is, no, you don't shh, you just come to life, right? You meet life. That's how you regulate, And so I get what your beginning was sort of pointing at is we have this idea that peace is a good thing, that peace of mind is a good thing, that we want to be in a state of peace. And that's not completely created in error. Of course,
sure.
Peace is this wonderful state. Please bring more of it to the world. Only we think we can do it by tranquilizing the aspects of ourselves that are not at peace. Mm-hmm. The problem is it doesn't work well, right? So this is something, I've been turning around in my mind. It's like, okay, let's say we look at it through the nervous system because we had that episode on the nervous system. And let's say we're able to access the relaxation response, maybe through a meditation, maybe through listening to a teacher like Matt Kahn, maybe through Rolfing, maybe through craniosacral or whatever we do, restorative yoga, we access the parasympathetic. We are now in peace. How beautiful. What a wonderful thing to do. Yet that alone doesn't further your life, right? It doesn't seem to create a change. What often we note is, oh my God, I feel so at peace. And then what? An hour later, a day later, 2 days later, we're back grappling with the same kind of thought stream, the same belief systems, the same crunchy bits that we had prior. So then we're like, oh, maybe I got to do it every day. And we start to do this, right? And it's like, okay, but at what point does this evolve into a different scenario? So I feel like what you're talking about is this tendency that we can have that's actually a movement of fear. It's not it's not just a desire for peace, although that's probably a part of it, this very pure desire to be in your optimal state of functioning. It is a fear mechanism that says, I don't want to take a closer look at my life. I don't want to have to change anything. I don't want to have to face what I'm afraid of or what makes me anxious. I just want it all to stop so I can just finally be blissed out without confronting anything.
Yeah.
And in that moment, it's like, I'm just going to try to accept what's unacceptable and tranquilize myself so that I can raise my vibe and everything can be okay with the world. Mm-hmm. Only it doesn't really work like that.
Right. Because we're here to actually engage with our lives,
I guess so. I mean, I don't know exactly what we're here for, but that can only presume.
I don't know. I'm just on the ride.
I mean, it's just the only presumption one can make because that doesn't work, right? If it worked, you would go do a bunch of ayahuasca or LSD or ecstasy, or you would do a ton of meditation. Yeah. Or you'd be a monk and you'd go and you'd meditate for 3 years straight. And then you'd come out this always elevated human being whose life is flowing beautifully and is not having these, I was going to say personality disorders. I don't know why.
Okay. Different conversation.
Not having so much chaos show up in their life and in their being. But that doesn't really seem to happen. So I have to assume there's something about meeting our actual life, AKA our actual being, that is of importance to us.
Yeah. You know, it's making me think about, I have a friend who's a trauma therapist, and she does EMDR and she does lens neurofeedback, which is a specific kind of neurofeedback, quite different from regular old neurofeedback. And I remember her saying to me once, I found it so interesting. We were having a conversation about how clients do with this kind of trauma therapy, where you actually can clear a lot of it much more quickly than, say, like the field of trauma therapy is evolving very quickly right now, which is very exciting. So there are these ways that it's not like, 20 years of doom and gloom. Things can shift quickly. And she said, the thing that people are challenged by the most with this work is the amount of clarity that shows up in their life very quickly. So I hear that word and I'm like, that's interesting. Say more. And she's like, well, when your trauma heals, and when it heals in this way that it heals fairly quickly, and I'm paraphrasing because this is a conversation from about a year ago. She's like, suddenly you just see things in your life with much more clarity. You see what's not working and you can't not see it anymore. So let's say if you're somebody who's been patterned by a lot of trauma, it wouldn't be unusual to choose an abusive or at least a fraught relationship, somewhere on that spectrum between fraught to abusive. And then you heal in your nervous system a lot of your trauma, and then it just doesn't fit anymore. And it's like, oh, I wouldn't choose that anymore. This doesn't resonate anymore. And she was like, so the challenge is that what happens is people go through this process where a lot of stuff just doesn't fit in their lives anymore. And I'm listening to her and I'm like, this sounds exactly like the spiritual path and what people talk about with awakening, which, we talked about some in our last episode, and that word doesn't matter so much, but the word clarity can be a helpful word because that's what everyone describes as hard, but it's not hard. It's a relief, right? Like if you would say, is it better to have an abusive relationship or not? Everyone would say, oh, well, not. But the hard part only comes when separate self says, no, it's too scary. They'll be mad. I'll be alone. I'll never meet another partner. I'm unlovable. Separate self tells all these things, all these stories that aren't true, which makes it hard to act on the clarity. But those things aren't true. Clarity says, I don't like being in this awful relationship. And then you're asked to take some action towards not being in that awful relationship. So it's so interesting to think about that conversation because it's like you wouldn't expect somebody to say that what's hard for people is the level of clarity that arrives. But it's only hard for separate self because separate self says, I shouldn't look at that, whatever that is.
Right. But we're in separate self most of the time. So it is experienced as very challenging. Well, I mean, why do we have the saying ignorance is bliss?
Right. I know. Yeah.
Right. It's baked into the culture. Like as soon as I can recognize that gluten's a problem for my body with clarity, I can never have it again without being aware that there's an impact.
Yeah.
So isn't ignorance bliss where I just eat gluten and I'm super shitty and sick,
I feel
but
really
I don't
sick.
have to give up gluten?
But I don't know why.
I could eat this yummy treat and, clarity would make me have to give up something that I have a mental attachment to, right? So I'm thinking as you were talking about going through my process with getting mold illness and then having the clarity that I have to move out of Miami.
Right.
And it was stupid painful to have that clarity. Stupid painful. I hated that whole phase. It was like I felt in the hell realms. And some of it was because of what was happening to my brain. The mold toxins were attacking my brain and my limbic system. So surely that was a piece of it, but only a piece, because in reality, I have always been cast into the hell realms when I perceive I'm going to greatly disappoint the people that I care the most about, right? So here I am. I get this clarity that my environment is making me sick. It's not right for me on multiple levels, not just physically, but even energetically, emotionally, and that I have to leave, but I'm going to disappoint my parents and my husband, right? And in reality, I am going to disappoint them a little bit. In reality, though, they were also going to get over it, right? So, but in the middle, so clarity came to me. It didn't feel like, clarity.
Right. What a relief. So good to know. I have to leave.
Yes. It felt like crap.
Yeah.
Now that I know this, I either have to betray myself or face this thing that's so crunchy for me to face, which is disappointing people I love. Ultimately, it was, I'm really looking right in the eye of my vibrational codependency pattern. And I'm either going to have to heal that, really invite that to release and shift in my life, or I'm going to have to recognize that I'm not doing that at the expense of my very well-being. So I felt that in those moments, you kind of, for a second, wish you didn't know that your life's not working the way it is, because you wish, and you have those fantasy thoughts where you're like, just let it work this way anyway. You just want to not face
a million times. Yes, I've been there.
The stickiness. And then what happened was I moved through it. I did, of course, choose my well-being, because thank God I do have enough clarity and wherewithal for that. And then it felt great. It was almost like a give birth process.
Yeah, right.
You're pushing. It's like, oh my God, that it's probably going to end at some point. I mean, we're all probably, who's listening to this podcast, probably all of you, and certainly you and I, Brooke, we're all smart enough to know everything is temporary. If I'm in a state of pain, it's not going to last forever. Probably my parents are going to get over it. Probably Mario's going to get over it. Probably I'm going to get over it. Doesn't matter though. Here I am pushing, and it hurts like a mofo. That is all that my awareness is captivated by, is the actual labor contraction. But then it was birthed, and it's beautiful. And what's so interesting is at this moment of my life, I sometimes reflect on this with you, I feel like I don't think everything's perfectly aligned for me yet. I think there's still a couple of shifts that will happen, but my life is pretty well supportive of my essential nature. My work is very supportive. The podcast with you is very supportive. My relationship is supportive. Where I live, it's almost like I got through the other end. And then what clarity offered was a life that's actually more fulfilling towards you.
Yeah. I've been thinking so much lately about how that as a concept, that lives can be in very harmonious alignment, is so threatening. And it's threatening to the separate self, and we all have one. So, okay, that's not a problem. But it's to even talk about it feels a little risky or a little blasphemous, because and of course we've seen that be used in harmful ways as well. All that bright siding thing. Be careful. Don't have a negative thought or emotion, because then you'll get kicked out of paradise. But if you pretend hard enough, you can pretend your life is actually in alignment, So it happens on that end of the spectrum as well, without a doubt. But there actually is right alignment. It's not complicated or mystical or a lotto win. You can just keep moving towards alignment. Now, that is the warrior's journey. It's not, it's not modeled well in our culture. It's not something we see a lot of the people around us doing, which is what I mean by not modeled well in the culture. We don't there's a huge part of us, i.e. our separate self, that doesn't really believe that that's true, that there really could be alignment and goodness in all of the categories of our lives. And so it takes a lot of courage. And I would say that sometimes, like if we just talk about clarity, right? You see the clarity, you make the choice, just do it, right? Like the just do it kind of spiritual mantra. One of the reasons why that can be so hurty and so hard is because what's missing from that equation is the love. And this is why we're both obsessed with Matt Kahn right now, is because he's so good at talking about whatever arises, whatever the separate self is saying or doing or believing. If you can see it, i.e. if there's clarity to have the awareness, oh, sweetheart, you believe it is not remotely possible for you to have a life of joyful alignment in all categories. Oh, sweetheart, I see you. And like, it's not because you, separate self, are bad and you're the enemy and you need to shut up already and you need to get out of here. It's that word that Matt uses so beautifully all the time, like that gorgeous innocence, like that simple, innocent misunderstanding. And it's just like, that is the extra alchemical agent. Like if we could create a little perfect alchemy mathematical formula, it's like clarity plus unconditional love towards the self, towards all of the nooks and crannies internally, can deliver you towards alignment. Because let's say there's something that you realize is totally out of alignment, like my example of a relationship that's just not going to work for you. One that's, in my example, just to make it kind of big and obvious, like very harmful. And then you see separate self tell all the stories. I'm afraid I'll be harmed if I leave. I'm afraid I'll be alone forever. All of my friends and family will think that I'm an idiot. All of my, and you just see each one of those stories and you go, oh, sweetheart, that is a painful thing to be living under. I see that. I see that you've believed that. And like, I love you. It's okay. Maybe it's not true. Like I see how that happened. I see how that was created. I see that you've been operating from that place and that it's hurtful. And I feel like that is the extra step of getting there to a life that actually is in alignment. Like maybe we should talk about that a little bit, like that actually really exists. You can keep going towards alignment. I was
thinking the same thing this morning. I don't know why. And I guess I was thinking about, in some way, the concept that love is sacrifice and love is compromise. That's so built into our cultural foundation. Love is hard work. Love is sacrifice. Love is compromise. These are like the trinity of relationships.
So just indoctrinated, like.
Yes.
Yeah.
And everybody just thinks this is true.
And that you're noble if you do the hard work.
And there's no way out of it. So you may as well accept it, because if this is what relationship is, then when your relationship feels constantly like a push and pull or constantly like chaos, that's normal. And if you're asking them to sacrifice what they need because you need something different and they're doing it to you and you're caught in a nice tug of war, well, that's normal relationship stuff, right? And I remember years ago, I had a friend in San Francisco, and I was recently divorced, and she was talking about her marriage. She had been with her partner for, 15 years, 16 years. It was something like that. Sweet guy, great couple. And I remember her saying, every morning he wakes up and tells me how beautiful I am and how much he loves me. And I'm like, really?
What?
That's possible? It was this really astonishing moment to recognize. I was shocked that someone would do that every day for 15 years. That could keep running. So you're like, what, content together? And it's not that they didn't have their fair share of things that they would navigate as two human beings, but every day they had this resting place of, I adore you. You are this phenomenal creature. And that was very foreign to me. But I swear, just her saying that stuck with me because it was my body mind going, oh, this is possible.
Mm-hmm.
That level of relating, or what we're speaking about in terms of fulfillment, is possible. Fast forward to today, I'm with Mario just shy of 7 years, and it is like that every day.
Mm-hmm.
I never would have thought that was possible. So I guess the dilemma is, you were referencing separate self, but in certain states of consciousness, that idea that life can be fulfilling, like you can actually really, really derive fulfillment from your workplace, whatever that is, your job, your stay-at-home parenting, like whatever your full-time experience is, you can derive fulfillment. You can derive fulfillment from your relationship. It can be really sweet, really nourishing. You can derive fulfillment where you live. It can be super aligned and supportive of your body, whatever body type you have, whatever it requires, is abnormal. Or from that state of consciousness, it sounds like a fantastical pipe dream that you have to work really hard to get by setting goals and striving extra much.
Yeah.
And it doesn't sound like it is the birthright of all human beings.
Yeah. And we just don't get that shown to us. We don't get it. Like you said, this gorgeous friend, you had this wonderful opportunity to have invited into your reality. Oh, this too. Like, this is on the menu? What page on the menu is this? I've never seen this page of the menu. I like everything on this page. I didn't even know this was an option. So I think the more we can model it, the better. And I also know that, like, for me, understanding that fulfillment, really nourishing fulfillment in all categories of my life is an option, has been a real journey. And I couldn't just go from A to Z.
No.
I had to do, and I continue, obviously, to have to go through all the steps. Now it's more delightful because I can see it and love it instead of see it, hook into it, be terrified, want to die, tell myself terrible stories, It depends, right? Because some of my categories are more painfully conditioned than others. But now it's like walking those steps of letting go of layers of belief systems towards fulfillment is really sweet and fun and interesting. But we also don't need to give ourselves yet another painful, put the lid on ourselves shame story, which says, why can't you just, manifest perfect fulfillment? And so I think that we have to give ourselves permission. It's totally okay to go from total clusterfuck, like let's say in a job situation, we're like, this is not working. My boss is abusive. I make shit money. I have to commute an hour each way in terrible traffic. Everything about this is out of alignment. This sucks. I want out. You don't need to stay in that job until you find utter fulfillment. What might happen, I don't know, but is you look for something that's just like some relief. Like, oh my God, okay, my friend needs somebody for 6 months to do this job that is 20 minutes away. And the pay isn't great, but it's a little better. And it's only for 6 months. And it'll give me a chance to look for something that's just more fulfillment. Great. Don't punish yourself by saying that you've failed because you're not in total fulfillment, because that's just another separate self way of putting ourselves in a box, So we get to take the journey. We get to give ourselves permission to take the journey. But it's really nice to know that on the other side of labor pains, there is actually real goodness. Not bright siding, put on a mask goodness, like real goodness. And what's funny is that when you really land in that, separate self freaks the fuck out because it's like, oh, well, if I was just totally fulfilled, what am I going to do with myself? It starts to tell this story of like, well, if it's built on fear and you take away its job, it doesn't have anything to complain about. It doesn't have anything to strive towards. It doesn't have anything to shame itself over. It's like, what am I going to do? If like fulfillment actually feels terrifying to this aspect of self. And so that's where, you know, some of what we talked about in the last episode, that kind of fear stuff comes up and you get to love that too. Like, oh, sweetheart, you think that you're a real thing and that you're dying because you're out of the job, right? Like, because I'm not giving you some task to obsess and worry and strive and grab towards. So that's a part of the process too. But we covered that a little bit last time.
I was thinking about the story that I've told before, but we do get a lot of new listeners who just kind of pop in randomly to whatever interests them. So I'm going to say it again and remind everybody. But when I was in Vancouver and I was talking on the phone with Kieran, I had a session with her and I was telling her about the challenges of being a sensitive person and, you know, blah, blah, blah. It's so hard. You feel everybody's feelings, la, 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 can't eat what I want, all these different things. And, oh, it's so challenging being sensitive. That's just part of the makeup is gifts and challenges. And she's like, no, you're just not living a life that's aligned for you because you think life has to be challenging. And it was this epiphany that I could make choices that actually fed my nature, not who I thought I should be, not what I thought was right to be, not even what my personality was attracted towards, you know, but I could make choices that actually supported me. Mm-hmm. And was a big opening to recognize that we are active participants, that peace of mind, even though it's an internal state, how do I say it differently? Let me back up. We just can't avoid that when our life's fucked up, we're going to struggle with having peace of mind.
Yeah.
So when our life is not at all aligned with the essence of who we are, not supportive for who we are, we're going to feel stress. And that's okay. But then don't feel bad that you're feeling stress, right? Like it's just part of it because there are things that work for you. Fulfillment is kind of this very personal thing, right? Like what is fulfilling for me is not going to be what's fulfilling for someone else. It's not like for fulfillment, everybody wishes to be a millionaire and everybody wishes to have, you know, a private jet and live in the mountains of California, right? Everybody's got their own unique thing that fills them up. So it's so genius to recognize that if your life is not an actual match for you, of course, some little waves of stress or belief or fear may be more frequently showing up in your pond. So that's first, what part of what you were talking about. But I do think that it's very interesting that you also can't get down on yourself because it feels to me much more like a gradual process. Mm-hmm. You know, in my life, it's been much more like a gradual process. It's almost like even in the way that I chose relationships, it was like people were kind of more and more available for that tender love I was seeking. I didn't just go right into someone who tells me they love me every single day and adores me. Mm-hmm. I went through this kind of process because I had a lot of constrictions around receiving love, right? So sometimes I think for people, it's like, well, what's on your menu right now? Like, meaning what's ripe for you to get to that next stage of consciousness, that next stage of experience. So, you know, right now we're doing this class with Kieran called Fearlessness. And I thought it was so genius because she was talking about desire. And she was talking about how if it's a really genuine desire, then if it arrived in your lap the next day, like if God just granted it to you and it busted through the door, like here it is, you would feel like,
like, thank God. Yes.
Yes, I want this so much. Hallelujah. Like, and what's interesting is, let's say, for example, let's say you think you want a relationship. Oh, why don't I have that partnership that, my friend has? I always wanted that. But if you were to imagine that tomorrow this perfect person was like plopped in your lap and you were forever loving and you were settled into a house and, all those things you think you wanted, does that feel right? Because sometimes what actually feels right for you is you're like, well, I want a relationship, but I need a little distance. I want them to be like a little bit far so that we can touch in, and then I can have a lot of space to go and process, right? So it's almost like that's the next level of right for you, that's kind of working towards you healing the constrictions enough and shifting to that kind of consciousness that then will welcome what is your ultimate state of fulfillment.
Yeah.
Does that make any sense?
It makes perfect sense. And I think that the picture you started to paint of is the one that our culture paints of what fulfillment looks like. Fulfillment looks like house in the hills, private jet, multimillionaire. And fulfillment only happens for certain people who are lucky by birth. So fuck you. And it's like, that's a story of fulfillment designed to keep you wanting something that's not actually happening. But if we look at our actual lives, we will see that there are certain things that are fulfilling, certain things that are out of alignment. And then for the things that are out of alignment, you can dance with them. You can say like, well, if not this, then what? And then once I get to the then what, like in your example of the relationship, is that ripe right now? Or what feels good right now? What feels good right now is I'm not ready to like share a closet.
Yeah, like I'm just not there. No
right.
judgment.
No judgment. And maybe one day we'll be there,
my body.
Or maybe it will always be fulfilling to never share a closet with someone. Who knows? Because that's the future. It doesn't exist. And so we get to have this much more intimate relationship with ourselves, which is like a part of what's so phenomenal about about this whole process is that we get to really keep turning towards ourselves in this beloved way. Like, no, you, sweetheart, what's right for you? And we can be hip to ourselves whenever we start telling a story that has nothing at all to do with our current life. Like, well, I just know that I'd be really happy if I, lived in Europe and was a farmer. Really? You don't have any connection to that world. You've never tried that out. You got nothing at all to do with that. Sounds like a story, but so what is the next step? Like, right in front of you, not in this effortful, check the box, get the gold star, but where does genuine desire move you towards? Like, okay, well, not the job with the abusive boss where I have to commute an hour each way and make crap money. Okay. So what is available? And then you get to play.
Yeah. And maybe the next step is a job with a nice boss, even though it's not the perfect job.
Right. It's still kind of crap money. You don't want to do it forever.
Is something else. I was thinking like, if I look at my life right now, I feel fairly fulfilled, especially with my partnership and my work life. Where I chose to live, I really like Austin. Like thumbs up. The summers aren't great for me. Like I have a sense that I kind of got in the ballpark of fulfillment, but I didn't nail it yet. And that might be easily adjusted. I don't know. Maybe
like,
I just
don't leave because I want to move there.
I know.
Even though I've never been. Speaking of la stories.
Maybe then I'd be fulfilled. Or like maybe I just need more time traveling or in California. But like what it feels like is, closer. Not perfect, but closer. And the cool part is being at the stage right now where it's like, I'm in the circle, right? Like I'm thinking about like a bullseye target for some reason. And like, I'm getting closer to the center and that's wonderful. And I can see that without letting it be a judgment, without feeling bummed out, without feeling grabby hands. Just, that's so interesting. And this is what's up right now. And like, it feels right enough. And maybe one day there's going to be something else that arises to the surface about getting my needs met in my ecosystem. Yeah. Right. and how wonderful. So I think like the way that one could approach this is one, just keep allowing the concept that just maybe ultimate fulfillment exists. Like just maybe.
Plant that seed. You don't have to grab it or just let it be there in the background. Just back burner it.
Yeah, like just maybe life is set up where when you move from clarity, you can feel fulfilled inside. And that doesn't mean that everyone gets to have certain external variables. It means each unique being has fulfillment available to them. So hold that as a seed. And then you just keep checking in with what you actually desire. Like, what is your right next step that's right in front of you? You meet yourself with love. You make space for what exists. You keep moving towards clarity a little more and what you're like able to do. So, for example, I don't really know this to be true, but I'm just going to hypothesize. Like maybe I would have found somewhere in California better because of the terrain, but it was a stretch enough for Mario to move to Austin. He wasn't exactly feeling California. So maybe all that was available for me at the time was to push my husband and my parents as far as I did, right? And maybe I just couldn't go past that. That's great. That's amazing. I took a giant step for clarity for myself. Now, I actually don't know that that's true. I don't know that I should have been in California. I'm just using an example, right? That sometimes what we're up against in our life, like the step we can take next is the best step because that's all maybe we're prepared for. I can handle this much fear, this much pushing of my limits, this much risk. Great. Meet that with love, meet that with compassion, bring some clarity and keep looking for what arises in your desire system next. Like, what's the next right thing?
I describe to my clients sometimes that it's like this, if you're trying to figure out discerning from the level of your being instead of separate self or thinking mind, it's like this energetic game of hot or colder. You remember playing that as kids?
Yeah.
Like you're talking about Austin, it's like warm, really warm. You know, colder. When you go to other places, burning hot. Like it's kind of that, just like feeling in. And then letting go of the reins a little bit. You know, for me, I know that the time in my current house is coming to an end. It's just a desire. It's a desire for an upgrade. That's all I got. And so I'm just like, okay, that's it. I'm not house hunting constantly. I don't know. I don't know what it's going to be. I'm kind of curious to see what shows up. That's it. Just let that be there. Let the desire be there and just give it a little like wink. I see you. Okay.
Well, just to bring it full circle because of where we started, I think let's just put like a kind of bow on what we're saying.
Yeah, we went a little far afield, but obviously we wanted to talk about desire.
Wound up way over here. So ultimately, let's see if I can't paraphrase where we went. So we went from too often we think that we can be in peace of mind by sort of shushing our nervous system into quiet states. But that doesn't seem to create shift in life because it's a temporary stopgap. And oftentimes it's moving from fear and oftentimes it's moving from self-judgment. And that those states just create more of that. And that really, when you're getting quiet and all of these different things bubble up from positive feelings to distressing emotions, they're all messages for your soul of either something that's happening internally, like a constriction that hasn't been healed. Like, for example, my belief that I was here to make my parents happy when I described the mold story, or something externally that's not right. Like, I don't like where I live. I don't like my job. My relationship isn't actually satisfying. And in reality, often both, because one doesn't happen without the other. And so it's a message. So the practice of meditation and really for us, the way we engage with life, aka spiritual path, is to get really curious, loving, and compassionate about all that's arising so that we could then attend with clarity to the next ripe step that's in front of us to get closer to the ultimate fulfillment for our being.
Boom. Good recap.
Damn! Oh, yeah. I didn't even know where I was going to go with that.
We'll just leave it on that recap. Thank you so much for listening to today's show. The show notes, including any resources we mentioned, live at blissandgrit.com. And you can also come play with us on Instagram and Facebook. We're Bliss and Grit at both of those spots. So we really do spend all week texting, emailing, and calling each other about the teachings we were really finding helpful in any given week. If you want a weekly digest of what treasures we've discovered, you can subscribe on blissandgrit.com to get our weekly email. If you don't have time to comb through the spiritual world for all the best gems, you can just let us do that for you because we're doing it anyway. If you want to support the show, you can write us a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or on our Facebook page, which is Bliss and Grit. If technology isn't your thing, but you are enjoying the show, you can just tell your friends who you think might resonate with it. Huge gratitude to all of you who've written reviews already. Here's one from Bobby in Canada. I smile every time I hear the introduction song of Bliss and Grit. It feels like two good friends are joining me at work, on a walk, or during my commute. Bliss and Grit has become my go-to podcast. I am definitely ripe for this info, haha. I find myself choosing to repeat past Bliss and Grit episodes over new episodes of other podcasts I follow. Brooke and Vanessa are so knowledgeable, and I find so much value in listening to them chatting about their experience of the very things that affect me in the real world with real life stuff going on. Even though they say they're not gurus, for me, these two girls really are virtual spiritual friends. So much wisdom to offer. Brooke and Vanessa, please don't stop making these podcasts. You're really helping me to change my life. Thank you so much for that. And we love making these podcasts, so we're not going anywhere. We'll be back next week.